The Viking. You know the image, right? Brute strength, exploration, this kind of wild freedom. And in America, that image is absolutely everywhere. But here's the question. How much of that American Viking is real history, and how much is a legend we've just built for ourselves?
See, that's what we're going to dig into. Are we talking about history, which is, what actually happened, or are we talking about heritage, the stories we choose to tell about ourselves? They are not the same thing, and that difference is everything.
Because make no mistake, the Viking is baked into American culture. It's become this powerful symbol of strength, of that pioneering spirit. And for a lot of people, it's a really important part of their identity.
So, let's start with the legend. Where does this larger-than-life figure pop up in America today?
Honestly, this image is just everywhere. Of course, you've got the Minnesota Vikings in the NFL. But you'll also see these big statues of Leif Erikson in cities from Seattle to Boston, celebrating him as this ultimate immigrant trailblazer. It's the inspiration for huge fantasy novels like Magnus Chase, and it's the mascot for high schools all over the country. The Viking is a hero, a pioneer, and, a really powerful myth.
Okay, so that's the legend. It's big, it's powerful. But now let's switch gears. What does the hard evidence, the actual archaeology, have to say? Let's get to the truth. And it all starts in one and only one proven place.
The real story kicks off way back around 1000 AD. That's when the Norse set up a base in Newfoundland. Now, for centuries, they were launching voyages from their settlements in Greenland. We even have records of them sailing to a place they called Markland, which we think is part of Canada, to get timber, and that was as late as the 1300s. But it all kind of fizzled out in the 1400s, in part because the climate changed. The Little Ice Age made living in Greenland just too hard.
And this brings us to the absolute ground zero for all confirmed Norse history in North America, a place called Lonza Meadows in Newfoundland. And I want to be super clear about this. This is it. This is the only spot where archaeologists all agree without a doubt that the Norse actually built something.
So what did they find there? Well, the evidence is pretty amazing. Archaeologists dug up 8 buildings made of timber and turf, workshops, even a blacksmith's forge. It was a serious operation, big enough for maybe 90 people. But what they didn't find is almost more important. There was no sign of families living there, no kids' toys, no graves, no barns for cows or sheep, and no signs of a big battle. So the conclusion is pretty clear. This wasn't a town. It was a temporary base camp, probably for gathering resources like timber before they sailed back home to Greenland.
Okay, so the story seems pretty straightforward, right? A temporary base in Canada, and that's about it. But then we get a complication. One tiny little object that just throws a wrench in everything. It's a penny of mystery.
This is the main penny. It's a real, authentic Norse silver coin. We know it was minted in Norway sometime between 1065 and 1080. But here's the kicker. In 1957, it was discovered at a Native American archaeological site on the coast of Maine. So the coin is real. The big question is, how on earth did it get there?
Well, there are 2 main theories. Theory 1 is that a bunch of Norse sailors just sailed way farther south than we ever thought, landed in Maine, and somebody dropped it. The problem is, there is 0 other evidence for that. Then you have Theory 2, which almost everyone agrees is way more likely. It got there through trade. You see, the site where it was found was a massive indigenous trading hub, and this penny was the only Norse thing found there out of thousands of artifacts. And here's the real clincher. The coin has a little hole drilled in it, which strongly suggests it was being worn as a pendant, an object passed from person to person along these vast, ancient trade routes.
So yeah, while most experts feel pretty certain the coin traveled south through trade networks, not in a Viking's pocket, the debate itself is what's important. It keeps that little spark of mystery alive, and it fuels the legend of a much bigger Viking presence.
But sometimes, the desire to find a Viking past goes way beyond just mystery and straight into outright deception. So now, let's look at the anatomy of a truly wild hoax.
So get this. Back in 1936, the director of Canada's biggest museum, C.T. Corelli, saw a few rusty pieces of iron and just declared, "This is the biggest historical find that has ever been made in America." I mean, wow. That quote just perfectly sums up the blind excitement that let a massive fraud take hold.
And here's how this whole mess went down. Step 1. A prospector walks in with what he says are Norse relics, a sword, an axe head that he found in Ontario. Step 2. The museum director, Corelli, is totally electrified and he buys them on the spot, with hardly any proof. But then, step 3, a couple of amateur archaeologists start poking around and asking some tough questions.
That's when it gets ugly. Step 4. Corelli actually blocks their investigation. He uses his power to keep them from publishing their doubts in academic journals. Just a total cover-up. But finally, step 5, the truth comes out. The relics were a complete and total hoax. It turned into this sordid story about academic ego and a serious abuse of power.
Okay, so we've looked at the one proven site, the one mysterious coin, and one spectacular fake. Which brings us all the way back to our first question. If the actual historical footprint is so tiny, why is the myth of the American Vikings so huge?
And it really boils down to this simple but powerful distinction. History is what happened. Heritage is what we choose to remember. And in America, we've definitely chosen to remember the Viking in a very specific, very powerful way.
So what does this Viking figure represent to us today? Well, for Scandinavian Americans, he's often seen as a heroic, trailblazing immigrant ancestor. For the wider culture, he's a symbol of adventure, strength, and that classic pioneering spirit. And for high schoolers from Oregon to Hawaii, the Viking is like a talisman of fierceness, power, and protection. It's an image that serves a lot of different modern needs.
And what's really fascinating is that this heritage, this tradition, is being invented right now, right in front of our eyes. Just look at the Minnesota Vikings football team. That famous Jallarhorn they blow, it's not some ancient relic. They had it made when they built their new stadium. And their Viking war chant, they totally borrowed it in 2016 from Icelandic soccer fans. But here's the best part. The Icelandic fans learned it from a Scottish football team. So these supposedly ancient traditions are often brand new.
And that really brings us to the final thought here. The actual archaeological history of the Norse in North America is a pretty brief and temporary story. But the cultural heritage of the American Viking is enormous, it's powerful, and it's still growing. We know the history. The real question is, what does the heritage we've created say about it?